information, getting things moving. The other issue, I think, is contributing to what is problematic about access to information in especially African societies, is this whole notion of leadership. In a democracy, we don't have leaders, we have representatives. So we have to understand, we have to get this across to people. You don't have a leader. Every one of us in a democracy is a leader.
Thank you very much. Yes, I just wanted to touch on 2 points. The first one is, yes, as the Governor mentioned about the economic disparities that remained, and I want to add by saying it actually did not just remain, it widened, not only on class line, but on ethnic lines as well. And this is mainly due to unequal access to information, to education, and to employment. And I want to challenge the media houses to basically give us information about, just an example, in terms of access to education. If we can get statistics about, since independence, how many students were trained and qualified themselves, be it in Namibia or abroad, and from where were they? And that will give us the indication of systematic exclusion of the ethnic minorities, which I feel was not really touched on when we talk about minorities. But the outcry of the ethnic minorities in Namibia does not get any attention. And we are facing a reality that, I might be too radical on this, but by 2030, or should I say 2050, there will be an extinction of some minority groups because of the economic exclusion. I think that that's a reality. But I also want to talk about the aspect of mindset and perception in terms of information. That when we talk about the majority, it automatically is concluded that it is political or ethnic majority rights. And when we talk about minority, the ethnic minority is totally sidelined or ignored. And I think information disseminators must rather consider to talk about most instead of majority, so that we talk about most of the people. Because if we talk about majority of the people, it is understood that we are talking about the political majority or the ethnic majority. And it's not applied when it comes to the minority. And even the political minority is not considered as a minority. And the last one, in terms of rights to education, I think it would also be nice to talk about the equal access to information. Meaning, for example, with information about scholarships are given to Umasati, it must also be available to Karas region. And so there must be equal access and timeless access to information. And the right to employment, of course, we know that some groups are excluded through employment or denied the right to employment. How can we talk about discrimination in terms of employment for ethnic groups? And how can our rights be protected? Certainly I am from the minority, ethnic minority. The last one, maybe just by passing, in terms of individual rights, our president's daughter received a scholarship. I don't know whether it was the Chinese government or the Chinese business. How do we, yes, I want to bring it in terms of media not being persistent in pushing this issue. It was left in the air. But my point is not from that perspective. What I'm saying is, how do we look at that from her right to education versus sovereignty and the integrity of a state if one president's child is funded by the other president? Thank you.
My name is Elizabeth, and I'm the coordinator of the Editors Forum of Namibia. And My question is directed at Mukelani. Thank you very much for your presentation. The cases quoted there are similar, I think, in most African countries. We have a misuse of aid that is supposed to go to flood victims. I think we've had maize rotting in some warehouses and things like that. And then we have had also a case of toilets, I think Omusati toilets that were built there, hundreds of thousands, you know, costing a cost of a lavatory in Omusati. But then what I want to find out from you is, you know, okay, fine, you go to community, let's say you have ATI in Namibia, and then communities, you help communities to ask, you know, to ask for information. And then communities, perhaps, in that asking for that information, when it comes back, they unearth wrongdoing or criminal activities. What then happens? You know, how do you help them to prosecute these cases? We heard also yesterday that it's very costly to engage lawyers to, you know, to carry out these cases. If I look back at the case of the women, you know, who were sterilized against their consent, you know, were it not for the Legal Assistance Center, I'm sure they wouldn't have gone anywhere with their case. Okay.
Thank you. I want also the attention of Mukulani. First, your response to Edeth's question, you gave a very good account of how communities can move forward with access to information law, with the support of your organization and others. But we do know that individuals are more vulnerable. What experience do you have of individuals, not communities, who have had problems of accessing information? Where do they go? They may not have voices like communities to attract the attention of organizations like yours and others. What mechanisms can be put in place for individuals that are so vulnerable to channel their grievances for assistance? The second point I want to make is more a comment on your presentation. I think there is a very important lesson from Mukulani's presentation, namely the fact that fighting for the access to information is one phase. People actually working to access is a major phase. Now, following the legislation of such a law, what mechanisms would be there to support communities and individuals who want information but do not know what to do? In other words, if you have a coalition here, what plans are there for the coalition to establish a mechanism to support the citizens, both at the level of educating them for their rights and at the level of providing support for those who are too weak to access information by themselves?
Thank you very much. I'm Jan Kutsia from the Polytechnic. Every time we come back to the problem of leadership, is it not time that we start talking about role models that we can use, to which the youth can aspire, instead of just leaving the aspect of leadership every time behind? Can't we not think about leaders that can unite people, universal, transformational, visionary, moral leaders? I mean, the likes of Gandhi, Madiba, Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa. Should we not advocate that qualities of leadership in our youth. From an educational point of view, I think that for me it makes sense to do that. Because we are living in a corruption-stricken country with a lot of minority groups, where people are alienated, polarized, labelized, victimized. So let's look at leadership that can unite all people as far as possible. Thank you.
Okay, that will be the last question. I don't think we will be able to.
All right, thank you. I think since yesterday, one of the major things that is emerging is that, as Professor Karekario said, getting access to information legislation is only the beginning. So what you begin to see is that there are challenges at two main levels. One is at the supply side, the supply of information, where we are talking about government capacity to archive, to have systematic ways of archiving and retrieving information that is usable to users. And the other challenge is at the receiving side or at the demand side, where we are looking at the capacity of people to actually demand information and be able to use that information efficiently. My question is to Mukelani, because I think what you addressed is more to do with the demand side, with the citizens, with civil society and so on. What interventions or what strategies do you see as important in sort of making sure that governments or even corporations, because I think we've been talking more about government and leaving out other institutions that actually hold important information which is critical for citizenship. So I think what strategies and interventions are necessary to make sure that these institutions are able to develop systems that collect information and are able to sort of disseminate it in more efficient ways. Thank you.
Okay. A number of challenges have gone out to civil society organizations to step it up, and also to the media to be more persistent in their reporting. I hope, Ms. Hinda, that you will allow us to discuss a number of the issues that you've raised in the next session, where we actually have the major media personalities on the panel to respond to that. But at the same time, issues around ethnic minorities and access to information, equal access to information. Mukelani, what happens when the nature of your support, or during the course of your support, the issue comes to litigation? Have you dealt with that in the past yourself, or have you facilitated access to organizations that can support communities in that way? But then when it comes to individuals and you don't have the support provided through a community, the mass support provided by a call for information by a community, how do individuals in the past benefited from your support? I think I'll probably respond initially to the questions about the plans of the coalition post this conference, and then role models. The question of leadership has come out. It came up yesterday and is coming up again today, and we shall have to interrogate that more. But then Mukelani also, and most of the questions are going to you, but let us not exclude the rest of our panelists. What strategies or interventions are necessary to develop systems, not only for government, but corporates, all institutions, to facilitate access to information?
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you for those questions. Perhaps I should start with Elizabeth's question. I think I should have been a professional storyteller, because I always reply by telling stories. Now, go back, Elizabeth, to that case that I spoke about earlier, the Indian case. Now that the MKSS and the communities had exposed malpractice in in the food subsidy scheme. What then happened? The MKSS then convened what they called a Johnson wine. Essentially, a Johnson wine is a public gathering, a public meeting, wherein the MKSS called on all the villages and all the ration dealers, the shopkeepers, and government officials to come and present the results of their investigation into this matter. Remember, earlier I said that this is not just about the citizen. Sometimes the government institution can, in a way, benefit from knowing, because all of our governments, unfortunately these days, governments do not provide services. They do not build schools or run clinics or deliver water. They tend to do these things through middlemen, the contractors. And it's at the contractor level that things go wrong. Now, if you are able to expose that type of malpractice by talking to the people on the ground and alerting government institutions to what is happening, government institutions are likely to be interested to follow up on that. And this is what happened in the case of the villagers in Rajasthan, because for the first time officials were realizing or were being made aware of the malpractices or the fraud that was happening in terms of this scheme. And a number of the shopkeepers were indeed held accountable. A number of them were charged, a number of them were convicted for fraud and corruption. In the case of Ndambanana that I spoke about, that water village, what then happened is that the municipality, after we had worked with the community, the municipality said to us, look, we would like to bring water to this village, but this village is built or is in a valley surrounded by mountains. It's difficult for us to drill in pipes that will deliver water to this community. But what we will do in the interim is to provide weekly water deliveries by water tankers. And they contracted a company to provide water to this village. And the villagers were happy for a couple of months. But then what happened is that they came back to us and they said, you know, those water tankers, sometimes they come and sometimes they don't. And we have noticed that these water tankers tend to go to sections of the village where the drivers have girlfriends. So in sections of the village where they don't have girlfriends, we don't get water. And so what we then asked of the municipality was, where is the service level agreement that determines the frequency of the delivery of the service? And where is the contract? Can we see those documents so that we can go back to the villagers and say to them, according to this agreement, the company is supposed to come 3 times a week. You won't believe what the municipality said to us. The municipality said, we don't have a service level agreement with this company. Now, if you don't have a service level agreement with the company, that's a violation of the Public Finance Management Act, which requires that for every contract there must be a service level agreement. And it wasn't done in this case. So we reported the matter to the Auditor General for his action. What I'm trying to show here is that it never ever ends with getting the information. We have also learned to understand customer care, because this is what we ended up doing, having to go back to the communities and helping them along in asserting their rights. Yes, Prof.
Just for what you are saying, could you also address the question, how do we work in such a way that the community don't become dependent on the NGO in the long run?
Of course. You see, I think, like I said earlier, we were training people to be freedom of information law specialists, and it didn't help. We had to bring it down to one action: how to request information. Never mind about other things relating to the act, but how do you ask? And a number of the communities that we worked with, we're just focusing on how do you ask? What's the next question that you need to ask? And so there was a lot of that that we constantly had to do, because, like, you are right, this village, this water village, a couple of years later they wrote back to me, or they called me, and they said, now we have a problem with electricity. At which point I was going, no. I mean, at this rate, you are going to ask me to move into your village and have a homestead and a wife. But then I said to them, go, remember how we dealt with the situation. Remember what questions you asked when you were when we were dealing with the water issue. Like, who is in charge? And how do you ask the question? What do you happen when you get what happens when you get the answer? And we said to them, go back and do exactly those things. And they didn't come back to say, no, we are stuck. Because then they had seen how it worked in the first place, and it was successful. And they were able to then do it the second time around. But indeed, like you say, Prof, these are communities. With individuals, it's very difficult. When you're dealing with the community, they have that confidence that as a group we can go and ask difficult questions. But individuals, it tends to be quite difficult to do that. And this draws me to the weaknesses in the South African law. The South African law, as I said on Monday, slagging off the US. The South African law is based on the American system, which says if you are denied information, you sue. Now, that's not likely to happen in the context of an ordinary African country. People don't have the means and the ability to sue. So that's why it's important to have human rights organizations, like national human rights institutions, the ombudsman, and most importantly, the information commissioner. I don't know if Malcolm is still here, but Malcolm perhaps could tell us a bit more about the Liberian situation, where Liberia is the only country of the 10 that have access to information laws on the continent. Liberia is the only country that has actually established an information commission, which would serve the purpose that Prof is identifying, assisting individuals to assert their right of access to information. In South Africa, we don't have an information commission, but we are working very hard to have that structure established, because we understand how important for individuals to have support systems through institutions such as the Information Commission or the Human Rights Commission or the Ombud. Again, Prof, what you are asking, I always worry when Prof asks me a question, because I know it's a leading question. I know he wants me to mention something that I had forgotten before. When the law was passed in South Africa, the civil society groups that were campaigning for the adoption of the law made a decision not to disband the coalition once the law had been passed. But the decision was to retain a structure, a civil society structure that will monitor implementation of the legislation. This is how my organization came about. We emerged from a civil society coalition for the law, and it was decided that we need a structure that will make sure that what is provided in the law actually happens in reality. The Open Democracy Advice Center, which I represent, is a law clinic registered with the Law Society, focusing specifically on access to information law. So people who are struggling to get information that they want from either the private sector or the public sector are able to come through to us and seek legal assistance, which we provide. And so I would like to find out from ADID if, since the adoption of the legislation, how has civil society responded now to this need to monitor what actually happens in reality? And perhaps Malcolm could also talk to that situation as well. But as we all know, passing the law is the easy bit, but making it work is very difficult. That's why it's important to keep some kind of civil society activity happening to ensure that the law works as it should. Now, the last question came from Dr. Moyo, who asked about what interventions can be used to support the demand side. What we have done was to, firstly, we were very critical of government. We were saying they are not implementing the legislation, they are not interested. And then later we found out that actually they have serious challenges. Number one, to understand the legislation, to understand what their responsibilities are in implementation. And so we helped the Human Rights Commission to establish what is called an Information Officers Forum, which is a platform where officials can meet and discuss their challenges of implementation amongst themselves, so that they are able to identify benchmarks and best practice, and to have that best practice replicated. So we have arranged activities where people from the city of Cape Town can travel to the city of Johannesburg and learn about the system that is used in the city of Johannesburg to comply with the legislation. And we have found that as civil society activists, sometimes we are not taken seriously by officials. Like the first question is, who are you representing? Where did you get your mandate? But sometimes officials learn more by hearing from each other, where as equals they sit around and they discuss their challenges honestly. And what we have done has been able to draw in from other countries as well, bringing in people from India, from Jamaica, from Uganda, to meet with their counterparts in South Africa and learn from each other. I think that's one way, that's one of the mechanisms that we have used to address weaknesses and challenges on the demand side, and it seems to be working. Thank you.
Thank you, Mokolani. Any of the other panelists wanting to respond?
Thank you. The issue of individuals to access information is really a crucial question, I think. And in the absence of a civil society movement or organization that really focuses on that, I think there is a need for such an organization, an NGO. So we don't have it. So there is a challenge for some of us here to really sit together as civil society organizations and to look at what type of information is that we as respective organizations can disseminate. And in the absence of a research center or information center where the public knows that they can really find information, I think there is a challenge for us to establish such a center or an organization that would really focus on educating the civil society on access of information, where to get it, even just to direct them, to train them, to advocate for them, and to make that sort of information available to them as to where to access this information. So there is really a need for us to do that. With regards to role modeling, this is really an issue that, as the minister there was saying, everybody is a leader. But nobody will realize that everybody is a leader unless the civil society organizations advocate for it, train people within their respective institutions. We have the unions, for example, accept mobilizing the workers to sometimes strike for salaries. What else do they really provide for employees? So there is a need really for unions, for every civil society organization to make sure that we give the necessary information, that we are competent organizations, that we really enhances ourselves and work towards. Now when you talk about leadership, I don't say that everybody is not a leader. Leadership means that there will always be people in a given community or setup, even in a family. Not everybody will necessarily take leadership responsibilities. But there are people who have those gifts or skills or experiences or training that can really demand leadership roles and that can take a community to a certain level to recognize and experience and learn the skills and necessary competencies that everybody in a given society needs to know that this is my right and I have to exert my right.
Yeah, if I could just comment on
NGOs empowering the community. Our organization's vision is that we want to see the consumer complaining for himself and taking charge of his or her business. But of course, we are also focusing on advocacy, and by so doing, we are also educating them about their rights and so on. But the need now is for the country to have the relevant laws, because it's no use that if there's no law, I mean, the business people, you buy expired milk, if they refuse